if you're an intelligent person, you can't be certain about anything.
Right.
I'm not young enough to know everything, like that old expression.
Yeah, yeah.
So that must have, did you find that when you're with the atheist in Vegas?
That was my fear, was because Penn is a big part
ever.
Penn is a big part of that group. I was there.
Yeah.
And I saw Penn while he was
His
there.
business
very
card
briefly.
says there is no God.
Yeah, and Penn and I have,
That's true
have
for the
come
listeners.
up against each other, and I love Penn. He's got a heart the size of San Francisco, and he's a huge bully at the very same time. And so he's hard to have a conversation with. He accused me of being, are you one of those believers? And I never even heard that term, but I guess this is a big term that atheists use. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't even know what he meant. But, and Bill's a little different. Bill I've interviewed.
He seems more agnostic.
He's more of an agnostic, he is. But Penn is part of that very hardcore, ardent atheist.
There is no God, and you're a fool if you believe in an invisible man.
and anyone who, like my dad's stance was, it's not my job to take comfort away from anybody. And as long as you're not shoving it down my throat and using it to change, you're not mixing church and state, do what you want to do in the privacy of your own church and your own home. And you're not, fingering kids, that's fine, But,
Me personally or society?
No, you personally, Jay,
All right.
yeah.
Well, I'm not, so we're good.
Perfect, good. So, I don't, and that's the thing about my dad was dogma on any side, right, left, Christian, Muslim, atheist, whatever, any kind of dogma, any kind of certainty in that way, you're a fool. You're a fool if you think you know everything.
What I'm startled about with religion and politics is and I don't know if this is new, it seems like there was a much more oscillating relationship between everyone, is no one takes a step to either side.
Nope.
Ever.
No.
Like, this is what it says in the Bible.
It's
if you don't believe this, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
Nice way to handpick the way you want to be a Catholic, JJ, but that's not how it works. It says here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, then everybody in the Old Testament's going to hell because they didn't have Christ to get to heaven with.
Right.
So,
yeah, there's a lot of contradiction in those books, certainly.
Being a seeker, is that what made you embrace the Buddhist and the Taoist type?
I went to Buddhism after my mother died because I really wanted to be able to sit with the void, the idea of nothingness and death, in a way that without terror in my mind or my body. My mom's death was very traumatic and intense.
How so?
Well, she went from being seemingly not perfectly healthy person. She had fibromyalgia and hepatitis C, and she suffered from fibromyalgia a lot, but she was like, fine one day, and 5 weeks later she was dead, which was a side effect of the chemo that she was having because she had very horrible liver cancer that was going to kill her in 2 months anyway.
This is really not funny at all.
No.
I thought this was going to be a way funnier story.
This is the part of my show where everyone cries.
Right.
And so for me, I was very close to my mother. My mother, father, and I, had that very enmeshed, dysfunctional family thing. I was very close to my mother, and I thought to myself, when I go, because in our family, no one really talked about Mom. Mom was dying, and none of us really were able to sit with it and talk about it and be present with it. We were all just like, "Hey, Mom, you need another vanilla and Sure?" It was kind of like that. I mean, and this is, I talk about this in my show, that, here's the man who's the truth seeker. I mean, the truth sayer of the country.
They were still together when your mom died?
Oh yeah, completely.
Okay.
And here my dad is the man who, speaks the truth for the culture. And yet in our family, we all, it's all the elephant in the room, dysfunctional family.
And that goes
stuff.
back to his childhood, the way his parents behaved.
I think it just goes back to just
how
how the three of us, grew up together.
Oh, okay.
We were a typical alcoholic family. Absolutely 100% alcoholic family. And so there was the elephant in the room and just brush things under the carpet, and we're all codependent. We'll all just take care of each other's feelings and pretend that there's nothing really happening here.
Yeah, there's always banana nutriment in the cupboard. It's
always,
totally normal.
Always. And I wanted to be able to sit with those uncomfortable things. I wanted to be able to sit with suffering in a way that it wasn't going to kill me.
Well, the Buddha.
And the Buddhists do that. That's what Buddhists do.
Life is suffering.
Yes, and it
the famous words of the Buddha.
Yes, and that there's a path to move beyond that, and the path is being able to sit with it to a point where you realize that suffering and pleasure, in some ways, are the same things.
Right.
So, and I was curious about that, and so I went and started studying with Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Zen guy, and some other teachers, and now I study with another gentleman named Genpo Roshi. And
what do you study when you sit down? Because is there a Buddhist Bible?
Yes, there's
the teachings of the Buddha, obviously.
Yeah, the Upanishad.
But I mean, is there?
Yeah, there's Upanishad. There's the written word that came down. First, it was an oral tradition, and then they started in Sanskrit writing this stuff down. So there's a lot of the Dhammapada. There's a lot of sutras, which are teachings and things like that.
Do Buddhists have the same battles that the Christians do, where there's the literal fanatical side and the people that are more like, hey, it's all in, suffering. There's a lot of interpretations.
No, that's a great question. I think there's a difference certainly between Eastern and when it's come to the West, and how America has wanted to kind of, it's turned into, if you look at all of the yoga places here on the West Side, I mean, this is kind of what's happened to these teachings as they've come to the West. It's become this thing to, let's go and find some space and make our butts look better.
George Carlin's daughter's doing it.
Exactly. But when I was actually going and sitting with the Sangha means community, you go and you do sitting meditation together, and walking meditation and sitting meditation, and then the teacher gives, a talk basically, which is kind of like a sermon, I guess, in a church, but it's more about questioning and maybe talking about a teaching or something the Buddha said, and
presence is a big one with the Buddhists, right?
Presence, absolutely, right. Being in the present moment, yes.
But in the Zen Buddhist, it becomes mindlessness with mindfulness simultaneously.
Yes, with the Buddhists.
I trip out on that on stage where I say something that was never in my head.
Yes.
And I realize, that's exactly what they're talking about.
Yes.
I said something and it was never up here.
Right.
It came out of my mouth. It skipped
the thinking,
everything in my mind.
Yes.
And it just happened like this bubble, and they heard it the exact same time I did.
Right.
And then the rest of the show, in my mind, I'm going, don't forget what that was. Don't forget what that was. Because that I was so mindful of this thing, and then the mindless.
Well, and the thing about Buddhism is that there's, we live in a dualistic world, good, bad, hot, cold, suffering, pleasure. So we're either running away from suffering or moving towards pleasure. That's just in our normal day life, what we do. And then there's this place of non-duality where everything is, it's not that everything is flat and equal and dull. It's that there is just no difference. And it's a space where you can get where suffering and pleasure are meaningless in a way, because it's all one thing anyway. It's all big one ride. It's like when you go out into nature and you have those moments where you're with nature and suddenly you feel very expanded and just full of joy, and everything is like, wow, no matter what, even though the world's really fucked up, it's all so beautiful also in the very same moment. That's kind of that non-dualistic place that people strive towards.
How much of that comes from, and forgive my ignorance, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like the word body in Tibetan literally translates, I think, to luggage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is just a shell.
Yes.
We are just passing through.
Right.
How much of that non-duality is a realization of the next plane,
right,
where we're not in this carbon-based form?
So you're talking about, this is like the two main schools of Buddhism,
okay,
and one of which says basically the body and everything material is an illusion and meaningless, and it's all about just staying in the enlightened state.
Yeah, I was never. I'm gonna pin as we go. There's a new drinking game I've been told is whenever I say, let's put a pin in that, take a shot. Let's put a pin in that. As we go, I'm going to keep putting pins in. I always thought that life is an illusion. I understand the sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
But you are a practicing searcher and seeker.
Right.
And I won't call you an ist of the teachings of the Buddha.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm like, well, that right now, this is not an illusion.
Right.
These are two grown-ups having a grown-up conversation. There's an engineer, there's a computer, there's stuff on the wall. Like this,
right,
it's not an illusion because I hung it. I hung that on the wall.
But what is more real than this, when we're talking about this particular point?
This moment, or
yes,
the point that we're talking about?
This point that, if we're talking about the point of the difference between illusion and quote-unquote non-illusion.
Okay.
So the illusion is, so The table's real. You and I are real. We're made of flesh, carbon-based, all that stuff. This is here. But the reason they call it an illusion is because it's temporary.
Right.
It
It's
goes
ephemeral,
away.
soon.
Right. And
Yeah.
so what's eternal? What's everlasting? What is the
soul.
thing? Right.
Right.
The soul, the transcendent, the true, the Christ. I mean, it really is what the word Christ is. Because Christ was both man and God.
Right.
So it's the God part of us.
That's the part of John that bugs me out, not John 3:16. It's right before that. Before he says, I'm the son of God, he says, I'm the son of man.
Right.
That's the part I don't know why people don't hold that, like, I think, is it John 3:15?
Right.
But it's literally like the sentence prior where I go, that's the cool shit.
Right, exactly. And so that's where you get this other school of Buddhism where you get the bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva goes and becomes an enlightened being.
You're talking nonsense.
Bodhisattva, won't you take me by the hand? You know that song. The bodhisattva gets enlightened and sees that it's all illusion and says, yeah, but you know what? There's work to be done. And I'm sticking around in the material world, and I'm going to do my part to ease suffering of all beings.
So Sting was right in the end.
Pretty much, yeah.
We're all spirits in the
Yep.
material world.
Oh, well, Sting is right about everything.
Almost everything.
Well, I mean...
He's got a real dick for a drummer.
Oh, well,
Holy shit.
everyone's got a blind spot.
Yeah. It's always amazed me that the police a bassist and a drummer would have that many arguments about time. Like
what else would they argue about?
But the two people, like Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts, like, you guys can shoot heroin into your ball bags.
We're
Mick
keeping
and
it going. We're the back line here. There's versions of Sympathy for the Devil where Mick is he's wearing fucking knee pads and a Philadelphia Eagles jersey and spandex pants. I'm a man about a taste. What's get my name? But you know what never changes? They're the backbone. They're the backbone, the spine. Yep.
But for some reason, Sting and Sumner,
no, can't agree.
they just are absolute. They just can't figure out if it's in twos or fours. Somebody's playing too fast. And you want to go, well, maybe it's Sting because he has two jobs.
Maybe, yeah.
He's the top,
He's
the
got
voice.
One in his head.
He's got the top, the high voice.
Right.
And then he's the bottom with the bass. And then, homeboy back behind on the skins. But then you watch a lot of police stuff and you go, you're fucking this up. I listen to a lot of live shit and he's fucking a lot of it. Stuart Copeland.
Right.
He seems to be an insufferable asshole. And Sting
well, I haven't met him, so I
seems to be very Buddhist, very Taoist, you want to talk about an illusion. This band's an illusion, and when we're done, I'm going to go have tantric sex with my wife and all of her friends.
Yep, for 14 hours straight.
For 14 hours straight, and then I'll write an opera, and I'll go hang out with Elvis Costello, and you'll be on the cover of fucking Drum magazine. So that's the illusion here. And then I like the guitarist, like, just never been involved.
Right.
He's the battered wife, like, I don't want to know nothing.
He's the lost child.
He's the mob lieutenant. I don't see nothing.
Nothing.
Hey, look, I talked to Sting, I talked to Copeland. What do you want I don't know nothing.
Just tell me where to show up.
Yeah. Let me hit my pedals. So life being an illusion, the only thing not being an illusion is our soul. But if that's the case, then life is not, if the only thing if life and the soul are one and the same, then the entire statement seems to be almost wrong to me.
That's the paradox.
That's where the Zen comes in.
Yeah.
Because Zen likes to take...
Well, fuck your head up.
Right. It's almost to the untrained eye or reader, and you know what? To the trained eye and reader,
right.
It is nonsense.
Right, because one of the questions I'll ask is things like...
Oh, real quick. I'm not calling Zen nonsense. It's something I study and love. But when you can mix Yogi Berra quotes in with like the 100 greatest Zen quotes of all time, and you mix in Yogi Berra and Gertrude Stein,
but
there is a bit of shenanigans.
See, this is the thing, is that when you're in the dualistic mind and you hear those Yogi Berra quotes, you're like, yeah, that's a Yogi Berra quote, and that's crazy. But when you're part of what the koan of Zen and what the Zen
Koan story
trying to get into your brain is to flip your mind into that transcendent space, so that when I say the Yogi Berra quote, it makes everything make perfect sense.
It makes sense. Most of what he says makes sense to me. I think because of my studying of Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, because it makes you...
If people don't want to come, we can't stop them.
Right.
And people go like, what a moron. And that's been my mantra on the road. When everyone's stressed about tickets, I'm like, I did all the press I can do. Mm-hmm. If people don't want to come, we can't stop them. If people aren't going to listen to this podcast, there's nothing I can do
to stop
if
them.
you're not listening.
No, you're not listening.
It gets late earlier. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded.